Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Today's webinar is going to be super interesting because we'll have Suresh talking about all related to the data culture, how we can basically contribute, how we can change our way of working thanks to open metadata. So hopefully that will give you kind of a very holistic view of anything that you can actually achieve with the platform. Thanks. So as we were saying, welcome everyone to the community meeting of August. For those of you that are on vacation, I don't know what you're doing here. You can see the recording on YouTube later. For those of you that are not on vacation, I hope you're having a nice summer. And let's start. So we have some people that this is their first community meeting. So just to give you a bit of a rough agenda on usually what we do here. So we start by reviewing the community stats. So how we are doing in the different platforms for our community, be it GitHub, be it Slack. How is also the community contributing? Those are basically very important KPIs for us as an open source community to see that people are chipping in, that people are also, let's say, enjoying as much the project as we're doing. And then we try to have as much time as possible also to go through a webinar, right? On these webinars, we dive deep into very specific topics of features about the platform where you can learn as much as possible and also where you can ask any related questions that you have. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat, right? In there, anyone else that actually knows the answer will be able to keep chipping in, and we'll also try to put a few minutes in the end just to have some live Q&A for anything that you might have in your mind. And for the community stats of this month, I think that they are pretty awesome, and not only because we gained 300 stars and 400 members in Slack, but actually because these numbers basically doubled from the last community meeting. So we met last time in June, and here we had just quote unquote plus 150 new stars and around 200 new community members. So it's really, really awesome to see how everything is thriving in our stats. And we have had 13 new community contributions. So thanks to everyone that has taken the time to getting familiar with the project, finding either an issue or an improvement that you want to do, and basically putting the time and effort to actually making that as part of the open source project. This is great, seeing how we are all chipping in into making open metadata better and better. So thank you very much to all of you folks. And in terms of some more numbers, this is how you can see a bit the pace that the open metadata community is taking. So week by week, we always are up of the 50 merged PRs. I think that you can also notice when we are actually doing some releases. So this week here, we did the release 110. As you can see, many things that we wanted to bring in. And anyway, the amount of work that is coming, be it from the Collate team or from the open source community, it's awesome. So folks, big applause here. Just keep this awesome work. And in terms of support, Andre was saying before, the Slack channel is awesome. I completely agree. The Slack channel is awesome. It's the best place for you to ask any questions, ask any feature requests, and basically just interact either with the Collate team or with the rest of the community. And just in the past 4 weeks, we had more than 700 questions, which is more than 200 questions extra that we had in the 4 weeks where we were analyzing the last community meeting on June. So as you can see, the pace, the size, the interaction of the community is always growing, which is really, really great to see. And in terms of the release, it was yesterday or 2 days ago that we just released Open Metadata 1.1.1. And in there, you can see a lot of user profile improvements in the UI. We also fixed the task flow. We improved the overall user experience around the service, the database, and the schema pages, how you can interact and extract the information in there. And a lot of you folks actually ask, hey, I love being able to deploy and manage all of these metadata ingestions from OpenMetadata, but I want to use my own grown expressions. So that has been added now for you as well, just to keep adding and fine-tuning where do you want all of these processes to run. In terms of connectors, we have released the new ClickSense connector for the server deployment. And you know that ClickSense has the cloud version and the server version. We have started doing the server version, so you can go try it out, give us your feedback, and we can keep improving based on your comments. We have also done a very, very big improvement in the Hive metadata performance. What we had before this release is that we were basically just querying and extracting all of those tables just by connecting to the Hive server, which, if the server was under a lot of load or you had a lot of tables, this could take basically an interesting amount of time. So what we did here is now you can directly connect to your Metastore if you actually have that available and exposed, and we're just going to extract the metadata directly from there. However, profiler, data quality, all of these pieces in the end, there we need to access the data, right? So we would still need to go into the Hive server way. We have also added for Trino, the usage and lineage connectors. And another thing that a lot of people also ask, you wanted to have basically more space for your table names and more space for your column names. So which granted, we changed the metadata standard. Now you can have up to 255, if I'm not wrong, or even more than that in both tables and columns. So hopefully now you would be able to fully scan all of your schemas. And we have also done some improvements and some changes in the internals on the search and the test suite. So please try it out. Go start with test, start with dev, and whenever you feel safe and comfortable, take a backup of your database, go to OpenMetadata 111 in production, let us know how everything is working out for you. If you have any questions, if you have any issues, you know where to reach us. And without further ado, I'm just going to pass the word to Suresh for this webinar on how you can improve your data culture with OpenMetadata. So, Suresh, floor is yours. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so today's webinar topic is how you can improve your data culture with OpenMetadata. Now quickly, some background about me. I have been in data space for a long time. I was a core contributor to Hadoop. And then I, from Yahoo, where we built Hadoop, we started a company called Hortonworks. I was one of the co-founders of that company. And then from there, I went on to become chief architect for data at Uber. And a lot of things that you will hear in this webinar is based on the experiences of, building a strong data culture at Uber. So now, before going into, why data culture is needed, what is the motivation for this? I just want to talk about a few of the problems that we had at Uber. And this is very, these problems are not just Uber specific. Any data-driven company has a lot of these problems. Now, some of those problems that at Uber that I was tasked to fix were, we were having incorrect, inconsistent, and unreliable business metrics. So depending on who you ask, you would get different numbers for, the number of trips happened last month on Uber, right? So the business metrics were not reliable and people were, not trusting the answers that they were getting. The second problem that we used to have with data is frequent breakages. Some of them were silent, right? So, 100,000 rows is missing in some, table, nobody knows about it. And after a few months, a data scientist is looking at the data and he says, this data doesn't look good. And if we, do some debugging, we would find, hundreds of thousands of rows are missing, right, in certain partitions. The third problem was we were a data-driven company. There were a lot of data scientists. There are a lot of business analysts. and there were a lot of data consumers. They could not understand the data, right? Because it was not documented, it was not modeled well. So it was hard to understand and use the data. And then, a lot of user disconnect and tribal knowledge, right? So, somebody wants access to some data. There have been cases where they've spent multiple days going from one person to the other person, just trying to understand who owns the data. Or somebody has a question on why this data is, certain way. You don't know who to ask. And so it ends up becoming, a goose chase, right? Where, you're, going from person to person, asking questions, sometimes getting answers, sometimes getting wrong answers, right? So user disconnect was a big problem. Constantly, right, what was happening was a lot of firefighting, right? Reactively, we are, bumping into data issues, and then, you fix it, and then it, again happens later. And then we started adding a lot of workarounds and bandages around, all these problems, which was resulting in a lot of growing tech debt, right? So also a lot of effort, right, from people to, debug, fix, build workarounds, things like that, right, which had resulted in a lot of lost productivity, right? So there are a lot of smart people, trying to, build things using data, but they were spending their time, fixing data quality issues, trying to understand the data, and running around, right? So the second problem was we were a data-driven company. Everything that Uber was doing was based off of data and machine learning models, right? When your driver would arrive, what is the ETA for your trip, even, incentives that is provided to drivers for driving, all of these were calculated using data. So anytime the data is bad, we are making all these wrong decisions based on, wrong metrics. And so there's a general lack of trust on the data, right? And when you have these kind of issues where people are wasting their time on fixing the issues, a lot more things that we could get out of data, we could not. And these were missed opportunities, right? So the question was, is data an asset, right? And, why are we having so many problems, right? Now, to, go understand why these problems were happening, I'll just go over what the data landscape at Uber looked like, right? And this is very similar to, this is very similar in other companies as well, maybe not at the scale of Uber, maybe not at the size of Uber. So typically, right, we have apps or services that, a company is providing. Maybe it's a web portal, maybe it's a mobile app. And, that is how, your users are consuming the services offered by your company. And these apps, produce lots of events, right? These events, you use it for understanding how your app is performing, doing funnel analysis on, where your user is dropping off in your app. All of these things are, driven through the app events. And these apps also talk to microservices or, services at the backend, right, over API. And, you could request a trip. In case of Uber, you can cancel a trip. All of those things are provided by these microservices. And these microservices also provide you estimated time of arrival, things like that, right? So there are these microservices, and these microservices have online transactional databases where they store the information, right? Who is a user, what is his profile, does he have credit card on his account, where is he located? All of this information is stored in online transactional databases with using which microservices persist their data, right? Now, the data flow happens, in, pretty much most of these companies this way, right? So there is a gateway to send your events from the app. There are logs that you're collecting from your microservices to understand how these services are performing. And then your online data that you're storing in transactional databases, you have some kind of a change data capture. So you can, send it over Kafka or ingest it directly to your data lake using your ingestion mechanism. Now, all of this data, right, is coming to your data lake, typically as raw data. And then what you do is you take the raw data, you do ETL, ELT, whatever you're performing to convert these data sets and model them for consumption, right, by the end users. And so using these model data sets, people are building reports, dashboards, machine learning models, some experimentation. All of this is driven through this machine learning models, right? I mean, but from the model data sets, right? And so if you look at it, in the data landscape, there is somebody who is writing an app that is producing events and that's making API calls. And then, some software engineers building the backend microservices, right? And designing, online transactional, database models and things like that. And then this data now flows into your offline analytics. And so there are data engineers that are, modeling this data and, preparing it for, people to consume. And then at the fag end, you have, data scientists, business analysts, and, operational folks who look at, the dashboards, who look at the reports, who send these reports to maybe regulatory agencies. So these are end consumers, right? Data consumers of the data. So the data is not only flowing from one system to another system, there are different people that are responsible for each of these systems, right? And these people not being connected was a big challenge for us, right? So now let's look at some of the problems that we found and why data culture is very important for solving this problem in the right way. The first problem that we saw was we were getting all kinds of invalid data when we were trying to understand the funnel analysis, right? Where is the user in the app and where is he dropping off? Did he complete a trip and things like that? That data was very unreliable. And when we spoke to people who are generating these events, we said, hey, we are seeing session ID and some of these timestamps in all these events are null. And so the app developers would say that can never happen, right? There's no way session ID can be null, timestamp cannot be null, locations cannot be incorrect. And so, when we did the analysis on the data that they were producing, we had 10% session IDs that were null. In some cases, 70% of timestamps were null, right? With that kind of bad data, you cannot actually build funnel analysis or any other machine learning models that we were building off of these events, right? The second problem was the data that they were producing was poorly designed, right? So there is certain events happening on the phone. Instead of sending, this is where the user is and this is what happened, they were sending, poorly modeled events, because of which we had to build a complex ETL where we would say, okay, this event happened after this event. That means user is in this, screen and things like that. So essentially, we were trying to, reconstruct the reality based on the sequence of events using, state machines. So that is, the problem with poorly designed data. And there were all kinds of bugs. Okay, so some kind of events happen, 10 times lesser on iOS compared to Android, right? We also found certain bugs where people were generating the same event in a for loop 200 times, something happened. So all of these things, you would assume that, these kind of things will not happen, but those assumptions were, incorrect, right? And, we were just right at the source where the data is being produced, we were having, data quality issues. And if you have quality issues at the source, there is no way you can improve the quality just at the data lake alone, right? The second problem that we also saw was, these microservices, they provide APIs, right? API as the interface, and they maintain backward compatibility, they document their API. However, online transactional database that they are storing data in, that's an implementation detail, right? And so what they would do is, there's an event, there's an API call that comes in, maybe, the data is not compliant with the schema, they would still write, this data into their online transactional database. And so the data that is there in this transactional databases were not schema compliant, right? And the second problem is, because database is an implementation detail, they will change the schema, they will add a new column, they will, make modifications to the data. But on the offline, data lake side, there are these data engineers that are not aware of all these changes that are happening. And when these changes happen, right, the data engineers have to actually go make a lot of code changes to take that raw data and convert it into, properly modeled data, right? So this, backward incompatible changes were a big problem. The other problem in microservices is, there's an, activity happening from the user side, but that is split across multiple microservices. Now on the offline side, you have to restitch all of these different things that are stored in different microservices to come to this is what is the user is doing, right? So you have to stitch it back from the fragmented picture of the data that is there in online transactional databases, right? And then we also had lots of problem on the data lake side, right? So as I said, 100,000 rows are missing, nobody knows about it, and then you find that problem months later. Sometimes you have to produce certain data and reports in a timely manner, but the data is not complete, right, in your data lakes. Even data lakes used to have incompatible schema evolution, because of which all the downstream users will get impacted, and they have to go change their code to handle the schema evolution, right? And many times ingestion has failed, rows are missing. There were no clear owners on who should be handling this ingestion, job failures, right? Because of which, on the data lake side, we were doing a lot of backfills to fix the issues. And when you fix an issue, all the downstream data now also has to, either do backfill or understand the impact of, hey, I had previously used the data that was incorrect, that was probably missing certain rows. What should I do, right, now that the data is restated? So this was a constant fire that was going on. And then finally, right, we have all this now data in the data lake, for all these data consumers. There were too many data sets, right? And so, finding which data, what data exists, what data I should use for my, building my machine learning model, for my dashboard, was a huge problem, right? And one of the reasons why people would give different answers to basic metrics like number of trips last month is there are two data sets that look identical, right? That says trip data, right? And then, one is maintained, the other one is not maintained. And so people end up using different data sets that are inconsistent with each other and come up with inconsistent answers, right? Which also cause confusion, right? There are so many data sets that look similar. Which one should I use, right? And then, there is, just the data, right? So there is one column missing in the data. And then, people are not adding that column, even, after, people have requested, data consumers have requested. And so data consumers ended up creating another data set, right, with that column added just for their use. So, and then finally, right, the data that existed did not have owners. It did not have documentation, which resulted in, wrong assumptions about the data, incorrect understanding, which all resulted in, issues related to, any data-driven decisions that we are making. Right. So, so these were, if you look at this picture, data is flowing from one place to the other. Different people are responsible for each of the, piece of data in, different places. And, there is no collaboration, there is no connection between them. They are disconnected from each other, right? And so this is not a problem that we could solve only in the data lake, or only in our BI tools, or maybe in only ingestion. It required an end-to-end, right, involvement of all the people. And so some of the key learnings, right, from this is data needs clear ownership, right? The problem with the ownership is, one, we did not have ownership for a lot of data assets. In some cases where we had ownership for data assets, that person might have left Uber, he might have, moved into another group. So it's, there's an owner, but he is not the real owner, right? So we decided that within Uber, as part of our practice and, of data culture, individuals should not own important data sets, right? It should be owned by a team, right? And if an individual leaves, the team still is there, and it's not one individual's responsibility; it is team's responsibility for the data, right? The second thing, right? you cannot improve what you don't measure, right? So um, we were not measuring anything related to how we are doing with the data, right? We were great at measuring how our app is doing and how our customers are doing, but we did not have good idea of how our data is doing and how we are doing with the data. And then, a lot of unverified assumptions were causing lots of data related issues, right? The third thing, which, we have data mesh and all of these guys who are also proposing this, which, we came to this conclusion long back before data mesh became a thing, which is, treat your data as a product, right? That means your important data, that is consumed by others should be, treated as a product with clear documentation. There should be SLA and guarantees, right? Understand your users and use cases and build the data for that versus, I'm just going to produce this data. You can use, any way you want. And I, don't know how you're using it. And I don't care how you're using it. Instead of that, you have customer focus and understand your users and use cases and improve your data continuously, right? And for this, you have to measure where your data is and continuously improve, right? Sort of adopt some of the processes from software development discipline, right? To data as well, instead of doing data organically, right? Track your users, their feedback, their CSAT, NPS, so that you understand how your data is doing, right? And how your users feel about it. Right? The other problem that we also saw was at Uber, there were too many tools, right? We had two data quality tools, yet we didn't have great data quality. We had multiple discovery tools, separate lineage tool, things like that. One of the problems with this is people had to jump from tool to tool to tool. In many cases, people did not even know a tool exists. So different people are sitting on different tools and they are getting different view of the data, different understanding of the data. So an integrated tool is necessary, right? And, by collecting metadata, you can actually build an integrated experience for different problems that people are trying to solve with these tools, right? And then, we are, automate your data quality, right? And it should be a continuous process within your company, track resource usage, cost management, automatically, delete the data by tracking, unused data. All of these things are, should be done in an automated fashion, not manually, right? That's a key learning that we came to. Now, finally, the last thing, open metadata will not be able to help you here, but you need to organize for data, right? Data doesn't come for free, right? You need to have people who work on, the data, within, however you're organizing your data teams, right? As, domains or centralized teams, you need to actually resource these teams to work on, keeping data high quality, reliable, and trustworthy. So let's jump into now data culture, right? So we had tried to solve some of these problems that I described multiple times, right? There were a lot of efforts within Uber to solve this problem, and I was not undertaking this effort for the first time. The problem was, say, data is lacking description, right? People would be tasked with next 2 months, go add descriptions, and people would add descriptions, and then they go back to their regular job. After a while, again, descriptions are missing, descriptions are stale, right? People would fix certain issues by, running, session ID is null, a couple of times, and then, they fix the problem. And then the problem is after a couple of months, again, session IDs are becoming null. So what we realized is, in order for solving this problem long term, we cannot take reactive ad hoc approaches, right? And we cannot take approaches only when there is a problem and there is a fire, right? We need to establish a strong, data culture where there is, clear ownership of data, and then, there is customer sensitivity, and keeping the data high quality, reliable should be part of the data culture. It cannot be an ad hoc reactive measure, right? And so a couple of things that we also did is, before we undertook this effort, there is a data engineering team, and they are the only people that are responsible for description, quality, all of these things. Instead, we turned it into data is a shared responsibility for the organization, and it requires end-to-end approach. That means if a data engineer is producing a data, maybe a data consumer can actually help them document it if they understand the data better. So this kind of shared responsibility for descriptions, for adding tags, for data quality is something that we adopted, and that worked out really well. And in order for this shared responsibility to work, we need to have good collaboration between these people, right? It cannot be, there cannot be a data asset without an owner, without an expert, and the data consumer has nobody to talk to. In the same way, a data engineer is producing the data, he doesn't understand who his users are, what use cases he is using it for. And so connecting these people and helping them collaborate effectively was a key part of establishing a strong data culture, right? And then finally, right, clear understanding as an organization, maybe as a team, where you are with your data, and being able to set goals and achieve those goals and measure the success in a continuous fashion is important, right? Aspect of data culture. So in next set of slides, as an organization, you may have different kinds of goals, different kinds of practices, compared to what I described so far on, some of the key things that Uber did. But open metadata is key to solving some of these problems. And I'll explain to you and show you, some of the functionality that exists that can help you establish a strong data culture. Now, a couple of things before I go to next set of slides. We built open metadata because of to solve these problems effectively and to establish a strong data culture within an organization. So that is the reason why we don't call open metadata as a data catalog. It is much more than a data catalog, right? It is a tool that helps you collaborate, understand where you are with your data, set up goals, measure success, and then help people, around the data collaborate, effectively. And so it's a lot more than a data catalog. So let's look into a few of the things that open metadata provides for establishing a strong data culture. Okay. So the first thing is we have built data insights. It's an awesome feature, right? This we didn't have at Uber. I wish we had this at Uber. So the first thing part of data insights is understanding what data you have, right? Now, this is key because if you don't know what data you have, you cannot improve it, you cannot measure it, right? And so open metadata is a central place where instead of maintaining multiple catalogs, a separate lineage tool, a separate data quality tool, a separate data observability tool, open metadata helps you get all your data, right? And all the things related to your data into a single place, right? And you can see what you have within your organization, right? Not just, databases and tables, even your pipelines and, your glossary, all of these things, right? And even, tasks related to your data, all of these things is centrally available in open metadata, right? And you can see how it is growing over a period of time. And this is a way you would see, hey, some of these tables are, getting added, number of tables is growing. Maybe you get a signal saying, people are just, because it is self-service platform, people are creating a lot of unnecessary data sets. Maybe you can, look into, deleting them, right? So this gives you visibility of what data you have. The second thing is, having a centralized data place, centralized place for data is very important, right? Like I was saying, if you try to do it with too many tools, there is, fragmentation and different people on, different tools, not having a consistent understanding of how you're doing with data. So avoid fragmentation at all costs, centralize the metadata, right? And the second thing is, and then the final thing is, don't have separate tools for your technical and business users, because in the end, your technical users are providing data for your business users. They need to be able to collaborate effectively. if you want to have good data outcomes. So use our data insights. It shows how your total data assets are and how they are growing over time. The second thing is drive ownership, right? Any data that doesn't have owners, right, is sort of like an orphan data set, right? And there are no guarantees that come with it. When there are problems, there is nobody to fix it. When there are questions, there's nobody to answer, right? So all important data should be owned, right? And it should be owned by a team. So one of the things that we have is we not only give you, the metrics around what data assets you have, whether they are owned or not. You can also set a KPI within open metadata. So you can have a goal of, okay, by this quarter, we are going to have 70% ownership for all the data, right? So you can set a goal, and that goal is shown here, right? And these goals become also tasks for different teams, or maybe data stewards, and so they can drive ownership. Also, open metadata has an excellent feature where if there is a data that is not owned, you can actually go, if you are the owner, you can say, hey, I am the owner of this, right? So you can claim ownership. So you can drive ownership by, letting your data people know that they can claim ownership on data that they're maintaining, right? So drive ownership. Ownership is an important aspect of data culture, right? Drive documentation, right? So we also measure and tell you what your documentation coverage is, right? In terms of, how you describe the data. You can also set KPIs for documenting your data. And, this quarter we want, 50% documentation to be completed, right? And, this becomes tasks for, your teams. You can continuously measure how you are doing, against the KPI that you set as a goal within the company. Another key thing here, right? This is continuously measured for you, right? The reason why we do this is, taking an example of Uber, right? There's a lot of frustration in the, our data science community, and they're saying, hey, the data is not documented, it is not usable, I cannot understand it. And so when they complain enough, one of the leaders within the company will, get frustrated and say, you need to finish documentation, for in next 2 months, right? And so the documentation is done. And then after a couple of months, as I was saying, either new data sets have gotten added, they don't have descriptions and documentation. Maybe the documentation, old documentation is no longer valid and stale. So in order to do this effectively, you need to continuously measure and continuously keep track of where you are with your organization goals. And that's what open metadata provides, right? You can, always see where your description coverage is. And if the description coverage falls below certain things, now teams know that they have to add descriptions, and they are the ones that are not at the organizational requirement of description coverage, right? Develop data vocabulary. This is very important. A lot of times glossaries end up being a central, an important tool for data governance, but it's also very important for common understanding of the data, right? Some examples, right? At Uber, what is a completed trip? Different people had different definition, and then so they would be producing different metrics. Or what is monthly active user, right? All of these things had different definitions across different teams. So you can actually define what a term means, right? So that everybody can be on the same page. You can drive consistent understanding. Now use those terms to add semantic meaning to your data, right? Now anytime somebody has payment method, they can actually go click here. You can document what payment methods are there, what do they mean. Maybe you can also document these are the only payment methods we accept, right? All of these things can be documented by using this vocabulary, right? So use our glossaries for not only defining business terms, you can also define concepts, right? What is a trip, right? Who is a driver? These are examples from Uber. So use governance for, use glossaries for, establishing a data vocabulary. The other important thing, and this is actually the most important aspect of what we learned at Uber, right? If you look at data, right, data looks like a service because you need freshness, completeness and things like that. But data also looks like an API, right? You need to document just like what an API is and have backward compatibility and all of those things. Now, when you take the analogy of the service, within your company, if you're providing certain service to your users and the service is built using maybe microservices, these microservices have different service tiers, right? A tier 1 microservice, if it is down, your entire service to your users could be down. Maybe less important service, right? If it is down, maybe experience that your users are getting out of the product is not that great, but it's still functional, right? Maybe there are services that are not critical for providing your business service at all, right? We adopted the same language for data, right? Tier 1 is the most important data within your organization, right? If the tier 1 data has issues, maybe your reports don't go on time, right? Maybe your report is, incorrect, and maybe your, revenue recognition has problems, and you need to restate it. So most important data sets are, marked as tier 1, and then it goes lower in the priority. And the least important one is tier 5, which people are creating these private data sets. They are because of self-service tool that they have, you can periodically delete them, right? So key thing to understand here is tiers are not certified data, or tiers are not verified data. Tiers are, this data is important, right? Whether it is verified or you have description coverage, or whether it is approved, irrespective, right? This tier is used for an important purpose within a company, and understanding this helps the data engineers who are producing the data. Hey, this is a key important data. I need to be very careful by while making schema changes and things like that. And if there is any problem, I need to actually fix this within certain period of time, right? So you can associate guarantees with the tier level, right? And you can start using tiers by taking your source of truth data, the core important data, and start marking them as tier 1, right? This also helps you discover this is an important data. It will have stronger guarantees. I can use it for important purposes as a data scientist. Okay. We also have metrics around tiers. You set KPIs. You can understand where you can start driving tiering, right? And set an organizational goal and start tiering the data so that you understand which data is important, which data is not important. The second benefit of this is maybe tier 5 data, you don't need to add descriptions at all, right? Maybe you don't need to tag them. Maybe you periodically delete them, versus tier 1 data must have stronger guarantees, better freshness, description coverage, and data quality tests, maybe set up data profiling and things like that, right? So tier helps you focus on most important data and use your time and resources on improving them, and it will have it will be more impactful for your organization instead of worrying about unimportant data. As an example, at Uber, when we started tiering, we used to measure our SLA for data, right? And when we started marking certain things as tier 1, now data teams had focus on, this is important data. I need to, have better SLA for them. And our SLA improved quite a bit, over a period of time, right? Through tiering. The other thing that open metadata enables is having an organizational goal is one thing, but providing continuous feedback on how your teams are doing, your organization is doing, is also super important, right? So we have, the data insights report. You can schedule time for this. And at Uber, we used to have these weekly reports, right? And that would go out and that would say, hey, here is how your team is doing. Here are pending tasks. Here is how the organization is doing. So we'll continue to add more features into our weekly report, but this is a way of giving feedback to teams on how they are doing so that all this information, the KPI, becomes actionable. The other thing is use browser extension, right? People are, on different tools, maybe on Tableau, maybe on BigQuery. This is a way where you can actually provide them consistent understanding of the data. All the descriptions and the glossaries, everything that you have captured in OpenMetadata should be at their fingertips in whichever tool they are using. So use our browser extension along with the tool so that people don't have to switch between multiple tools or come back to OpenMetadata. Wherever they are, they get the context and consistent understanding. Data as a product, right? Provide complete picture of what this product is, right? It is a product documentation. So you can actually set up sample data, right? So that people can understand what the data looks like. You can also, have, how the data volume is growing, how, many inserts are happening in a table. You can also understand what are the distinct proportions, null proportion, unique proportion within a column, right? Now, here is the case where if we had this feature for our session ID column at Uber, if 10% of the time the session ID is null, we would have actually quickly detected it. So we had to, run a separate, program for looking at all the data. Now here you're getting a clear picture of, credit card should always be unique, right? And session ID should not be null, right? You can see if null is 10%, your data has a problem, right? You can also, you can also see how the data is distributed, right? So we had a bug where number of miles driven by a driver was -1, and we were, adding all this, and aggregating it and figuring out total miles driven within Uber, and we used to have wrong answers, right? All of those things become visible for you, right? Both at the table level and the column level. So for important data, set up sample data, right? Table and column profiling so that you can easily understand how the data is distributed, look at, problems, right, within your data. Few things, right, from data as a product principle, right? Data quality is very important, right? Product quality is very important. If the product is of poor quality, your customers are not going to use it. The second thing is data quality is a shared responsibility, right? Now, a couple of things with data quality, right? When at Uber, we used to detect some issue, and then we used to do backfill, and then we used to go back to our normal life. Now you can take it to the next level where if session ID is null 10% of the time, using data quality, which is natively supported in OpenMetadata, you can simply right-click and add a test saying session ID cannot be, can have, null percentage for maybe 0.02, right? Percent of rows, right? And if that is not the case and session IDs, are being written as null, the test fails and then you will be immediately alerted, right? If the number of miles driven needs to be a positive number, you can actually add a test and say number of miles driven should always be greater than 0. And if somebody writes a -1 value, your test fails and you get informed. So instead of waiting for some data scientist to fumble into a problem, you can actually detect these problems. The other thing that you can also do is you can take our data quality tests. You can actually do them, as part of your ELT, and not publish the data if it doesn't meet certain data quality, data quality level, right? The other thing that, from collaboration perspective, you actually want your data consumers who are making assumptions about the data. Maybe a data scientist is looking at, number of miles driven should be greater than 0. They should be able to come and collaborate with you and add this assumption, convert this assumption into a test case, right? So that, if you break, this contract, then the consumer is alerted about it, and then, you can fix the issue, right? Few other things, right? Collaboration is a key aspect of OpenMetadata. Now, there is 2 different models, right? Data is provided as a service. I'm a data engineer. I produce this data. I don't treat the data consumers as customers. And so when they come to a problem, I say, I have other important priorities. They ask me, to add a column. I say, no, I have other priorities. I cannot add the column, because of which a lot of duplication of this, data happens. Now, treating data as a product means, listening to customers, right? Understanding their use cases, building your data product for them. You're not just building it because it's your job. You're building it for a customer. In order to build a great data product, you need to be able to collaborate with your customers effectively, right? So you can discover your customers through powerful lineage feature we have. You can actually, we have activity feeds that actually tells your customers how the data is changing. A column got dropped, maybe new tag got added, maybe the description was changed, but that is not meaningful to the customer. You can inform how your data is changing, right, constantly to your customers. And then you and your customers can have conversations, right, around these changes or any interactions that you have. And so this is a great way of capturing organizational knowledge as conversation threads right within open metadata, right? Your customers can create tasks for you. They can request descriptions. They can suggest description changes. They can ask features for you using tasks. And this is a way to actually organize for a product what customer wants, right? What are the feature requests, so that you can continue to improve your data product for a customer, right? You can use alerts features that we have, so that you can keep your customers informed about issues happening around their data. And then finally, announcements, right? Product announcement, right? This thing is getting deprecated. This is changing this way. We are building a better alternative product. All of those things can be, you can use announcements to keep your customers informed about the product, right? And provide them product updates, right? Now, finally, this is where I don't, open metadata, this issue goes beyond, open metadata as a part of, the data culture of an organization. One thing that I learned was, if you have to have a leadership buy-in in order to, establish a strong data culture, right? If they don't support you, and they don't think it is important, and they are not looking at all the metrics of how your data culture is improving or not improving, and when it is not improving, if they don't hold people responsible for it, your data culture will not change at all, right? You're collecting a whole bunch of metrics, and after a while nobody cares about it, and transforming the data culture as a project will fail, right? Second thing, and this is, beyond data culture, just around the data itself, right? Data does not come for free, right? A lot of people, when a project starts, right, they're like, oh, we need 3 software engineers for this month, this many, months. Nobody thinks about the data, right, aspect, right? This product is going to produce data. Data needs to be cleaned up, modeled, and then dashboards need to be built. So understand that anything that you're developing as in terms of product features also have impact on data, and that data needs to be resourced as well, right? The second thing is, because of domain oriented ownership, each domain, right, a software development team should have along with them a data engineer and a data analyst, right? Build this team as a self-sufficient team. If it cannot be like a separate person for each of the projects, allocate bandwidth for each of your domains and software features that you're building, right? And then as I was saying, prioritize data, right? A lot of times when there are constraints, right, people prioritize developing product features and never do that for data, which results in a lot of technical debt within the data organizations, right? So data should be prioritized like your product features and product development as well, right? So that's a key learning that we had, at Uber. So I took pretty much all the time going through the slides. If you guys have any questions, you can unmute and ask. I will also be around for another 15 minutes if people want to ask their questions and hang around.
Thanks, Srinivas. Yeah, this is Sujit here. I'm from Portland, Oregon. So I had a question on on the data observability use cases. I think part of it is answered in the chat, but one question I have, you have the lineage, right? You have the lineage of the pipelines, field level lineage, everything there. But um, if there is a failure in one of the pipeline, can I see that in a single view? Like, okay, this particular pipeline failed, and the status of that pipeline. You might be showing the metadata, but can we see the status of that pipeline for that day, that particular time of the day?
Yeah, so some of these are features that we are still building, and we have
Okay.
big plans on that. So we added support for data freshness, right? So we'll be able to automatically tell you that not only the pipeline has failed, if a pipeline is running slower, right, it will inform the downstream consumers that you will not be able to meet your data freshness, right? Because your upstream data, right, is that pipeline is running slow, or that pipeline has failed.
So we
Such
have
an
that. You have that already there.
we have that in our roadmap.
In the roadmap. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Bye.
Hey, hello. I have some questions. Make special detailed reports with information to see list of assets without description, for glossary term reviews, to have a list of terms without review to check it, and for data quality, for example, 100 or 200 first incorrect details to check it.
Now, for data insights itself, we are just scratching the surface, right? We will start adding a lot more, reports into our data insights, right? For example, where is the description missing, right? What are the data sets where it is missing? Even things like what are the unused data sets, right? So there are a lot of data insights related work that will come, right? But we are just getting started there. Matt,
Okay.
go ahead.
Hi there. I'm looking at using open metadata for something closer to biotechnology. And I was wondering about the data inputs that you can put into this in terms of sensor data for some of the greenhouses that I'm working on, genetics data in terms of DNA or protein reads that we're doing, or any other data that we're getting from our tools. That broad different types of data can be combined together pretty usefully in this type of software. Would that be correct?
Yes. So, open metadata is about metadata, right? So you are asking questions related to different kinds of data. So yeah, so we are about open metadata, and you should be able to, if you combine that data, we will have metadata related to that. The visualization we are talking about is not visualizing the data, visualizing metadata, right? Information about the data, right? For example, how the data is growing, number of rows. We actually don't look at data itself. We are looking at the metadata of, how many rows are there, how many columns are there.
Thank you for clarifying.
Andrew.
Hello, Shresh. Thanks for the presentation. Very, very interesting and very insightful. So when you were showing the diagram how things looked like at Uber, I had this question. Did you guys somehow differentiate between the data assets which are sort of internal, so they are not data products and they are not meant to be used by others, versus the stuff that is meant to be used by others? Because from my understanding, there will be lots of the first ones and maybe not that many of the second ones. And also, what kind of data did you treat like that? For example, were Kafka topics data assets that were meant to be used by others? Or was it just on the data warehouse level?
Yeah, so in our case, we exposed the data to, we did not have a concept of public, private, maintained, right? So we exposed data to everybody. And the reason why that happened was, a data scientist is using a model data, right? And there are certain columns that are missing. So he would complain and he would not get, that feature. And so what he would end up doing is he will directly go to the raw data and start, producing his own column, right? So that's problem because we were not treating data as a product, right? But what I would think is data as a product is a powerful concept, right? If you adopt and adopt it as a core part of your data culture, in which case within a domain, right? My thought process there is within a domain, only data product is exposed to outside domains, right? Any other implementation detail, right? Maybe the raw data, all of those things should be, only available within the domain, not exposed to outside domains. So, and that's the kind of feature that we are building with domains and data products in the next release.
Yeah, just to clarify here, so we are planning to use catalog as a place where we store all the data assets, but we are thinking about some of the use cases which are purely internal, for example, everything privacy related, versus the ones which are external and should be used by business users. So we almost need a way to filter the first one versus the second one. And so far I see that you suggest to use tiering for that, maybe. Maybe there are other ways to do that.
So when we do these domains and data products, if you are within domain X, you will only be able to see data products from other domains, right? Not the internal data within those domains. So those are the kind of things that we are going to add, in the next release.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So it's a pretty generic one, but I want to understand what's your take on it. As I see it, certain things need to come from the management, like this buy-in that you mentioned, and some things can come from the engineering product teams, maybe analysts and so on. I wonder if you have like good ideas, like where would be a good place to start with. Maybe it's tooling, maybe it's some processes internally, maybe it's connecting the people who produce data with people who consume it. Like, how would you do it if you were doing it from scratch, for example?
Yeah, so engineering effort, right, driven by an engineer, right, maybe with few peers within, will work only in a smaller setting where everybody accepts that this is an important thing, right? And it makes their life better. It solves the problem that they are facing. So it's that has to be a smaller group that can collaborate with each other, right? Now, in larger organization, different parts of the organization have different priorities, right? And there are different managers and they have different priorities. Maybe they are not collaborating well with another team. So in such cases where there might be political boundaries, right, that make all of this collaboration harder, it has to be top down, right, driven from somebody has to set this is the priority. And not only that, that person needs to actually continue to be involved on how things are changing, right? So at Uber we used to have exec level meeting where this information will be presented, right? How is the description coverage? How is the ownership coverage? How is the test coverage? How many incidents happen? How many untiered data sets are there? This was presented as a metric that, on a weekly meeting that would get discussed, right? There has to be that level of involvement, without which people are going to, do this, and then they see that nobody cares about it, and it just the effort doesn't doesn't pay returns.
Did you have to convince somebody, or was it
No, in our case, this was actually an effort started from the CEO of the company.
Okay.
So that it had fairly high priority.
I have a question. I have a one for you. Well, there's it's a kind of a bit abstract idea, of course. Is it possible that data culture can be brought to all the company without a top level approach?
Yeah, like
Okay.
I was saying, it
Go ahead.
depends on company size, right? Company size, organizational dynamic, so larger the company size, higher the hierarchy, collaboration across teams, across domains is a challenge, right? At that time, you need top level buy-in. But in a smaller startup, there are a couple of people, right? working together and they're collaborating effectively, they can actually do this in a smaller setting without any leadership buy-in. Okay, all right, guys. Thank you for attending, and thank you for insightful questions. Hope you learned from our experience of driving the data culture, and take your own challenge of driving data culture within your organizations. And Open Metadata is here to help you.
Awesome. Thank you, folks. Thank you, Suresh, for the presentation. We're going to be uploading the recording to YouTube. If you guys want to give it another watch, take some notes, ask some more questions, and we expect to see you all in Slack and continue the conversation. So thank you very much and have a great rest of the day. Bye.